Hello and welcome to the newsroom with Sana. Today we'll be taking a look at our first segment that focuses on what is happening across the Ukraine-Russia conflict, but also in particular the kind of rhetoric that we're hearing in from the head of state of Russia, who's saying that he's clarifying that there is going to be no attack on any European nation, something that seems to be a concern for EU parties. For this discussion, we've been joined by Ruslanas, Director Media Support Fund Lithuania, and also Dr. Muqtada Khan is Professor International Relations. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being part of the newsroom today. So on Dr. Muqtada's opinion on the matter, when we take a look at the distrust that exists that Ruslanas was also referring to, we've seen that Mr. Putin has said that he's willing to give a written declaration saying that he will not invade any country. Will that amount to something when we see the Russian side doing that? Will any written statement coming in from Putin put to bay any of these concerns?
I think there is a red herring, Sana. The issue really is not security guarantees to other European countries. The issue really is security guarantees for Ukraine. And in that very same speech, what is actually more remarkable is that Putin has said that unless his demands are met, he is unwilling to end his military campaign in Ukraine. So basically, he has said that, look, basically the proposal that Donald Trump submitted to Ukraine with those 28 points, that's going to be the basis for future agreements with Ukraine and Europe. And if those demands are not met, then we will try to achieve them on the battlefield if we cannot get them through a peaceful process. So I think the issue of whether Russia will attack in the future, etc., those issues of credibility are moot. They can be used in arguments, but we can talk about the credibility of the Western countries because the Russians have maintained that at the end of the Cold War, one of the assurances the Russians had been given was that there would be no need to expand NATO eastward, and NATO has been expanding eastward more rapidly after the Cold War than during the Cold War. So it's not about credibility of Putin. Putin may be around for another 5 years at the most, and even if Putin gives in writing that he may not attack Macedonia or any of the other Baltic states, the next leader might decide that he does not have to oblige to that. But the critical question really is the divide between the United States and Europe on this issue. Europe wants to go on fighting endlessly with Russia. They want to use Ukraine to defeat Russia militarily. And America wants to check out as quickly as possible. Already the United States is, I don't know how true it is, saying that it's not really supplying any more weapons to Ukraine. They are just selling it to Europe. And it's not very clear how much stamina Europe has to keep on fighting with Russia. So I'm not very sure that all the demands that the Europeans have made. There are some modifications to that 28-point plan. And 19 points have been derived in which, for example, Putin had demanded that Ukrainian forces be limited to 600,000. Now the Europeans have raised it to 800,000. The language that there should be a constitutional amendment to exclude Ukraine from ever joining into NATO in the future, that language has been diluted. So there are more assurances to safeguard Ukrainian sovereignty. And there is a rejection of giving any territory to Russia. So basically, they have said absolutely no to all demands that Russia has made in that plan. So now the question is whether for the Europeans, they now have a two-level game going. They first have to convince the Trump administration that the counter-proposal that they have made is legit and is worth taking to Putin. And then Donald Trump will have to then try and convince Putin to give up most of the demands that he has made in that 28-point plan. So I think the speech that Putin gave in Kyrgyzstan was essentially reacting to the reports that we are hearing. I have not seen the 19 points proposal, the counter proposal. I've seen the 28 points that the US submitted in Geneva to Europeans and to Ukrainians. So I think Putin's speech was more directed towards what was being reported in the Western media about the modifications made by Europeans to the original draft. which, as you know, there is a controversy going around here saying that it's actually not a draft prepared by Americans, but it was a draft prepared by the Russians, and it was leaked by the Russians to Axios magazine, thereby trapping Americans into essentially advancing. And Marco Rubio said so. He said this is not exactly the final document. This is a wish list of the Russians. So nevertheless, Putin's speech, the point of his speech was to say that, look, you have my wish list, and if you don't give it to me peacefully, I will try to take it on the battlefield.
Right, absolutely, and that's integral, of course, to see how this discussion moves forward. Rustanis, I want your take on this too, because when we take a look at what has changed from the 28-point plan to the 19-point plan, it seems that there's also there's also a need of clarity of what really Ukraine is agreeing to. Reportedly, we heard saying, especially what transpired in Abu Dhabi, referring to the fact that Ukraine is essentially agreeing to this new revised plan. But what does that mean, especially given the key sticking points that still remain in terms of military forces, in terms of additional territory? What really do you think is being agreed upon here? Can you give us some clarity on that?
I haven't seen the plan myself, the 19-point plan, but from what I hear from Ukraine, from Ukrainian friends, it's not about Zelensky, it's not about the political elite. It's about the Ukrainian will to fight the aggressor, the occupant, who is trying to occupy as much country, as much Ukraine as they can. And no matter, you have to also understand how Ukrainian society works, how, there are quite a lot of independent actors and also quite a lot of independent minds also in the amongst the military. So I don't think that it will be very, very easy to sign the paper and allow the Ukrainians to just give up their land. They will fight for it no matter what Zelensky is going to tell them, no matter what Americans are going to tell them. With guns, with shovels, with stones, they will fight. And this is not just about agreements. It's also about understanding that Ukrainians have been fighting for almost 4 years, and they will continue fighting. And I would like to just come back to what was said, that first of all, Europe is not trying to defeat Russia, is not trying to fight Russia. Europe simply is trying to buy some time to prepare military for the future Russian aggressions. This is what is happening. We are Ukrainians, by fighting furiously, they are buying time also for Europeans to get their military in order, which has been neglected since the Cold War ended. So this is very, very important aspect we have to realize. We are getting ready, and Europe has woken up, especially Germany. And I'm not sure if Russia is going to like to what it had woken up, because Europeans are ready, getting ready psychologically, they're getting ready economically, they're getting ready militarily to actually defend their borders, because it's not about that. No, Europeans trying to conquer Russia or defeat it. It's about Russia is trying to conquer and trying to attack European nations.
Right. Dr. Muqtadir, I'd like your take on this too, because I want to understand the sentiment that the European nations currently have. I understand all of what Rustanis was referring to in terms of the concerns the EU has in terms of what their stance is in the support of Ukraine and, of course, with reference to Russia. But we've also seen that there was some positive rhetoric with reference to the 28-point plan earlier that was given, saying that at least they welcome the step forward. They were saying it's going to a positive direction. They were still talking about it in terms that reflected a positive attitude toward the Trump administration's efforts, despite the fact that many criticized it being a plan that was drafted by Russia or inclined towards Russia. So I want to understand then what the EU stance is. If if they're opposing to the plan or to the current stances that being seen as part of the 28-point plan that was given earlier, why is it that there's still rhetoric that seems to appease the Trump administration?
Yeah, before that, I just want to make an observation about what the other speaker said about the awakening of Germany. Let me also tell you that while this was going on, these same European countries have funded, supported, and allowed a genocide to take place in Gaza, including Germany and Britain, along with Canada and the United States, have been the biggest perpetrators of arms transfer to Israel. And they have watched on television thousands and thousands of children, women, and men, women and children being massacred by Israel by their weapons. And if this is German awakening, then God save us all. So, but coming back to the Ukrainian issue, I think what the Europeans are trying to do, they fundamentally disagree with the shift in strategy from Joe Biden to, if you remember Joe Biden's slogan that we will fight with Russia for as long as it takes, with whatever it takes. So they were going to support Ukraine. As long as Ukrainians are willing to fight and die, both Europeans and Americans were willing to provide the weapons and the means. They're not providing any troops on the ground. Then all this awakening talk is rubbish. It is only if Russia were to invade any other country, they are willing to fight, especially if they are a non-NATO country, because basically they want the US to do all the heavy lifting, both financially as well as militarily. So I think most of the talk that you are hearing is trying to manage Donald Trump and trying to make sure that he does not pressure Ukraine into making concessions to Russia. That is the whole game plan. They want to procrastinate this. And there is a fundamental racism in Western societies. So as long as images of Ukrainians suffering are broadcast on Western media, of white Christians being killed, European nations are going to be under tremendous pressure to do something about it, and so will Donald Trump. And so they want this thing to continue, hoping that Donald Trump, under pressure from the devastation that Russia is causing, will essentially go back to the position that Biden had. But I think Donald Trump is determined to get out of this. He's concerned about his own personal glory. He wants a Nobel Prize, and he fully understands that he won't be able to win a Nobel Prize if this war continues. But his own support base, the MAGA crowd, they are just absolutely frustrated that America is not protecting its own borders. And basically, we have spent close to $175 billion on Ukraine and another $40–50 billion here on Israel. So the MAGA crowd is actually suffering. There's inflation in the US, there's higher unemployment. Most of the middle class in the US cannot afford the lives that they would like to have. So there is a lot of pressure on Donald Trump to simply end his foreign policy adventures, come home and fix things at home. So he wants to get done with this conflict. And now there is genuine pressure on Russia, especially with India stopping buying of Russian oil. That's a loss of over $60 billion worth of oil every year. So apparently 1/3 of Russian exports in oil have declined, and even some Chinese refineries have reduced their orders from Russian oil. So the Europeans are calculating that maybe Russian economy may last maybe 1 more year, or at the most 2 more years at this rate before it completely collapses. And so they want to hang in there. I also want to suggest that not all Ukrainians are willing to fight with sticks and shovels with Russia. There have been very clear draft dodging. There are people who have just migrated. Go to Turkey and walk into any bar, any restaurant in Turkey, and you will see young Ukrainians working remotely from Turkey and other parts of the world. So the population that migrated out of Ukraine is over 20% of the population. Most of them are in Europe. Not only that, the whole issue of corruption in Ukraine, even during war, these guys are supposed to be fighting for their homeland, but they're stealing from it too. And we are not talking about ordinary Ukrainians. We are talking about people who are very close to Zelensky. And then there is this final tricky point about which Putin keeps raising again and again about the illegitimacy of Zelensky. The Ukrainian constitution does say that they cannot have an election during the war, but Putin wants to know if Zelensky signs on to any document, if that document is going to be valid, because his term as president of Ukraine is over. And he's also actually, one of the points that was demanded in those 28 points was that within 100 days of an agreement, there should be an election in Ukraine, because I think the Russians are betting that Zelensky will lose the election because of corruption and the way he has conducted the war. But recently, the brutality of enhanced Russian bombing and the pressure that Russia has been putting on Ukraine has led to resurgence of Zelensky's popularity in the past few weeks. But I do want to say that there is a fundamentally pro-Ukrainian bias in the Western media. So when you read the Russian media, it seems you're looking at a different planet, and the Russian bias is overwhelming. And so when you look at European and American, the bias is a bit more subtle, but definitely there is bias. So it is very difficult to gauge what the reality on the ground really is in Ukraine, and how willing the Ukrainians are to have an endless war in which they continue to suffer loss of life and loss of infrastructure and potential loss of support, definitely from the US.